Saturday. It's June 22nd, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
All right, Michael. Well, it's been yet another wacky and unpredictable week in the news. Emmanuel Macron used to look like one of the most stable and predictable leaders in Europe, but on June 9th, he called for a snap legislative election that has thrown the country into political chaos. We have a great story on that in the issue by Alexander Marshall. Meanwhile, in London, it's Taylor Swift time. The songstress is coming to Wembley Stadium for 3 dates this weekend. More on that soon. Also, it's Royal Ascot Week, so we're very obsessed with hats, and also the return of Kate Middleton. Lots of big news on that front. Probably some more to come. But as usual, Michael Airmail is the antidote to all of that.
It is, Ashley. We've got a wonderful show. First, our brilliant co-editor, Alessandra Stanley, will explain why prominent tech and finance tycoons are giving piles of money to Donald Trump and why their behavior might be similar to certain German bankers and industrialists in the 1930s. Then, Rachel Hoden will join us from New York with her report on Rebecca Minkoff. For the past 2 decades, Minkoff's promoted herself as a designer and girl boss. Now, she's a real housewife. But, as Rachel will tell us, behind Minkoff's cultivated public image are rumors of a mismanaged business, dysfunctional professional behavior, and close links to the Church of Scientology. Then, Griffin Dunn, one of our favorite writers and actors, has a new book out, and it's a fantastic read. Many of you may know his film After Hours, but now he's written a brilliant and enchanting memoir about his friendship with Princess Leia, taking cues from his aunt Joan Didion, and much, much more. He'll join us to talk about his amazing life. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Michael, let's begin with our co-editor, Alessandra Stanley. She's made a fascinating comparison between the billionaires who backed Trump and the business leaders and industrialists of Weimar Germany who contributed to the rise in power of Adolf Hitler. It's not as far-fetched as we initially thought.
That's right. Alessandra is also a former bureau chief for the New York Times, having been in both Rome as well as Moscow.
Welcome, Alessandra.
Hello.
So Nelson Peltz, Jamie Dimon, so many American billionaires these days are flocking to the court of Trump. Is this only about money and taxes?
I sort of assumed it must be, but then I really started thinking about it, and that could be part of it. But these are all people who would vote for a Republican, for a Hoover Hoover or a Wendell Willkie. But for them to vote for Trump, it just doesn't add up. It can't just be about money. So I'm wondering if they're not, in fact, a little bit scared, because if they support Biden and Trump wins, Trump will come after them, right? I mean, he's the most vindictive person in the world. If they support Trump and Biden wins, what's he going to do? Nothing. They'll be fine. So I think there's both really selfish self-interest and also kind of fear, which is even worse.
Well, I was going to ask you about the economy, because despite the fact that we're sort of justifying the actions of these billionaires by saying that they're looking out for the bottom lines of their companies as well as their own personal fortunes, the American economy, as you report, it's just not in that bad of shape at the moment. How do you explain it?
Well, at first I thought you absolutely cannot compare these people to the bankers and industrialists in Weimar Germany who supported Hitler. And I thought, well, actually, they had better reasons to support a madman, right? I mean, that was Weimar Germany. It was runaway in hyperinflation. A third of the population was unemployed. They were paying war debts. The Communist Party was on the rise. I mean, they at least had better reasons, because as the Wall Street Journal tells you, the economy is doing great and the interest rates and everything else is really benefiting the very, very wealthy. So there's the canard of saying, well, we're worried about what happens to the economy under Biden. I mean, they're doing just fine right now under Biden.
What are the consequences? Are there any consequences?
I mean, it's bad enough that Republicans who know better are so scared of losing their congressional seats that they support Trump no matter what. These guys have much more power and influence. They have billions of dollars, right? Nothing can take that away from them, not even Trump. So the idea that they are just going to support Trump despite everything they've said in the past about him is just, I don't know what to say, except that it just feels like madness. It's just so reckless, because they know how reckless he is. They know how irresponsible he is. I think what is most galling is people like Bill Ackman or Steven Schwartzman, who say, oh, well, we're going to support Trump because he's tougher. He's a better supporter of Israel. Well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, if it suits Trump to turn on Israel, he will, because he doesn't care about Israel. He only cares about himself and his polls. That's, I think, what's so galling. And that's why this analogy to Weimar Germany, which I thought at first was a little specious, to me, it's not so ridiculous after all.
Yeah, I think if the last 12, whatever years have taught us anything, everyone thinks, I can strike a deal with Trump. I know how to manage him, and there's no managing him.
I know. And I don't know, this is what I think it's so galling, is they can support Trump with impunity. Right? I mean, they're not suffering for it. Their investors aren't peeling off and saying, no, we're going to go to a different bank. They're just able to do something that they must know is stupid and reckless and bad for the country. It could even be bad for them. They don't think it is, but it could be.
You resurfaced the great Trump quote, which is, quote, I am your retribution. He does not conceal his intentions, just like other people we've seen in history.
Exactly. And they should know history, and they should know recent history. That's what's so galling about this. It's alarming that people who should be more civic-minded, who have so much money, they can't possibly... if you have $50 billion and then one day it's $30 billion, it's not going to make any difference to your life, your heirs, to your charities, to anything else. But there's just some kind of weird psychological flaw where once you've made all this money, that's all you can really value yourself for, which is why I kept thinking about The Miser, the Moliere play, because it's not rational, but it is destructive.
What scared me so much about your piece, and also about the fact that we're seeing this sort of rallying cry of support around Trump from the business community, is that these guys are making a bet that he's going to win. I mean, what does this really say about the national mood right now?
Well, see, that's my question. Are they really convinced? I think they do think he's going to win, so I might as well support him. But it's also possible that they make the same calculation as I mentioned before, which is, if in the odd chance he wins, I don't want him putting the IRS on my back. Whereas if I support him and Biden wins, what's Biden going to do? Nothing. He's a law-abiding president. I think that they aren't thinking any further than a very, very, very small, selfish horizon.
And if Biden is a law-abiding president, we now have Trump is a convicted felon, right? So apparently that has not been a detriment to anyone in the business community or anyone at all, it seems, in terms of supporting him or not.
Well, that's what's very scary, is the idea that these people who are the elite, and possibly unfairly, I mean, the reason that people support Trump, or so many people, is because they feel the system is rigged against them, right? That money rules in a way that is unfair in a democracy and that kind of thing. These are the guys for whom it is rigged. And yet they are scared of populism, whatever it is. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up, but it is really, really bad and really destructive.
We have a sense of how history is going to look down on Trump. If you had to wager a guess, how do you think history is going to look down on Trump supporters?
Again, as with Germany, bad enough that the working classes and sort of the have-nots supported him. But the idea that the absolute elites of the country, the people with all the money, all the power, all the influence, supported him, that to me is unforgivable, right? I mean, I hope that there'll be a big chapter in history with Steve Schwarzman named, and it won't be what a great philanthropist would be. It will be what an amazing enabler and coward he was.
Yeah, on that question, you're also a former bureau chief of Moscow during the end days of the Soviet Union. So in some ways, this also has parallels, it seems to me, which is just like the oligarchs thinking, well, we can control Putin.
Yeah, absolutely. What's certainly true is that these guys are too young to remember World War II, fine. But they certainly have plenty of friends who are Russian oligarchs who, under Putin, thought that things were dandy, only to discover that if they said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing, in comes the Russian version of the IRS, confiscating all their goods and saying this belongs to the state now. It'll be harder for someone like Trump to do that, but he'll certainly try.
Alessandra, are there any billionaires who are on the right side of history here? I mean, who are the outliers that are getting behind Biden, that are taking a position of relative courage?
Well, Hollywood billionaires, and some of the people in Silicon Valley. Reid Hoffman, for example, is a Biden supporter, but he's surrounded by people like Peter Thiel and worse, who are kind of libertarian in spirit and think Biden will try to regulate us. Trump doesn't care. There are plenty of people in Hollywood who are raising money for Biden.
A small glimmer of hope.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Michael, I know if you had $1 billion, you wouldn't be giving a dime of it to that man.
Not at all. Not at all.
I'm giving every penny I have to Sleepy Joe, okay? He's a good man. You can just tell. He has his issues, don't we all? He's not perfect. But meanwhile, let's move on.
And speaking of moving on, we've got a story this week about Rebecca Minkoff, is a fashion designer and will be appearing soon on your television for Real Housewives of New York. And Rachel Hoden has a revealing story about her past and how she sort of transformed herself from a designer to a feminist and now to the Real Housewife of New York.
Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Rachel, you've got a fantastic piece of reporting this week about Rebecca Minkoff, a new Real Housewife of New York. But tell us a little bit about who she is and where she came from.
So Rebecca Minkoff is an American fashion designer. I think it's also important to distinguish who she purports to be from who she is behind closed doors. He was born in San Diego and then moved when she was about 10 years old, I believe, to Clearwater, Florida, which is sort of the hub of Scientology. He is a second-generation Scientologist and was essentially, raised in the church, grew up surrounded by fellow Scientologists, went to a Scientology school up until high school. When she graduated high school, she ended up moving to the city to pursue a career in fashion. And pretty much every step of the way, she was helped by a different Scientologist. So when she came to New York, she first interned for someone named Craig Taylor, who is a Scientologist and a fashion designer as well. When she got her first big break, it was because Jenna Elfman, who's also a Scientologist, wore an I Heart New York shirt that she made on Jay Leno, and just the list goes on after that.
Yeah, so as you note in your reporting this week, she's a second-generation Scientologist. And even as you reveal at the age of 11, there was an article in the St. Petersburg Times where Rebecca Minkoff, then 11 years old, or Becky as she was known, shared a written testimonial with the newspaper about her teaching. Quote, "The data that L. Ron Hubbard has put together is so effective that students are happy and wanting to go to school," she was quoted as saying, "just like me." You also report this week about her work promoting female founders, too. Can you tell us about that?
So over the years, while building her brand, she's also built this image for herself as sort of a paragon of female strength and female entrepreneurship. She goes around the country giving talks on how she achieved success in the business to young emerging fashion designers. She started something called the Female Founder Collective that aims to uplift other fellow female entrepreneurs. So she's really positioned herself at the forefront of feminism in a way. And Scientology, many of its tenets are inherently misogynistic. So there's sort of this very distinct discrepancy that has emerged between who she claims to be and who she purports to be publicly and who she actually is. From what I have learned when it comes to Scientology, the money only really flows one way, and it's into the church. And if you are a church member, if you're a Scientologist, there's no really dipping your toes in. It's you're all in or you're all out. And when you're all in, you are giving up huge sums of money regularly to the church, whether it's for courses you're taking, quote unquote courses, whether it is just to support Scientology, quote unquote front groups, which Rebecca has appeared publicly in support of. For instance, one called the Foundation for a Drug-Free World. So money is sort of constantly being funneled into the church if you are a Scientologist, and especially if you're successful. And it was reported in, I think it was 2019, that her and her family donated $5 million to the church. And they received some sort of award for it. The question then becomes, where did that money come from?
So, Rachel, what did Rebecca Minkoff say when you asked her to comment on this?
So far, not a lot. She hasn't spoken to me directly on the record, but she did send me an email basically telling me that her company is about to celebrate 20 years in the business, sort of framing her company as turning around right now at sort of a turning point. They're about to collaborate or partner with the Broadway show Wicked and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's interesting because up until 2019, it was reported the company was obviously privately owned, so you can't say this for sure, but it was reported that they were bringing in upwards of $100 million in revenue. And then cut to 2021, the company is apparently sold for somewhere between, I think it was 13 to 15 million or something like that, which is a precipitous drop. It's very significant. Feels like not nearly enough for a brand that was making $100 million in revenue just a couple of years prior. So that definitely raised a lot of eyebrows. And I think Rebecca's decision to go on The Real Housewives is part of a larger strategy to sort of pivot herself, create some sort of comeback for herself and her brand.
Where does Minkoff stand?
Yeah, so in the church, they have something called the Bridge to Total Freedom, which is essentially, if you're a Scientologist, you are always climbing the bridge to total freedom. And the ultimate goal is to reach the level or state of clear, which is sort of a state of godliness, for lack of a better word. It's said to come with immortality. So according to public records, Rebecca has achieved the state of clear and has continued up the bridge further as well. That's not uncommon for someone who is a second-generation Scientologist, because she's presumably been climbing the bridge since she was very young.
Rachel, so she's going to be on Real Housewives. How is she still perceived among that generation that came up with her, and how's her brand perceived?
Yeah, so she's always appealed to a more basic clientele, for lack of a better word. I don't think that she was ever really accepted by the fashion industry, insiders, or luxury fashion, that side of it. I think that it's interesting because a lot of customer base doesn't know about her ties to Scientology, and going on The Real Housewives is you're kind of making a deal with the devil that you're going to let everything out, expose everything. So it's interesting to me that she's willing to do that despite the backlash that will likely come from that. And presumably dip in sales, maybe that might come from that. I mean, when I just look on like comments and stuff like that, whether it's like Reddit or Instagram, people who find out that she's a Scientologist, lots of people immediately are like, I'm giving away my bag now. I'm not buying from her ever again, because it's sort of presumed that the money that you are using to buy one of her bags or whatever is indirectly being funneled into the church.
So one of the things I was struck by when in your reporting was, again, you talk about in her book Fearless and creating this, I do it all myself, and girl boss can go from the ground up. But she gave a TEDx talk and you revealed something in your reporting there. Can you tell us a little bit about that talk?
Yeah, so she gave a TEDx talk basically about her career and how she achieved success. And in the TEDx talk, as with most of them, there's sort of a screen behind her where PowerPoint is going on behind her, and she's flipping through the PowerPoint, photos of her as a young girl, etc. And then she gets to one slide while she's talking about the beginning of her career, and she's like, some of my designs, and it's basically fashion illustrations projected onto the screen. And interestingly, those fashion illustrations, there are 3 of them, belong to 3 different artists / illustrators / budding fashion designers. And it's just wild to me that she did that so openly and is still willing to put herself out there in such a way where it will expose these sorts of things that she's done in her past.
But Rachel, it's a terrific piece of reporting, and I encourage everyone to read it in this week's issue of Airmail. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we need some storytelling, Michael, and let's get Griffin Dunne on here. Not only is he an incredible actor, but now he's a memoirist that's putting the best in the business to shame. Welcome, Griffin.
Thank you for having me.
Griffin, of the many accolades given to the Friday Afternoon Club, candid is the word that keeps popping up. Why was this the right moment for you to delve into your history and write this memoir?
Well, I guess I'm an age where I don't really give a shit. I could be just as honest about myself as the writers in my family have been about their lives. It's sort of like the writing from a candid point of view has sort of been the bread and butter of John and Joan, my aunt and uncle, and my father. They always write from a personal place. And as I got older and the more time, the longer time went by since their passing, I was able to sort of really acknowledge in an even deeper way just how extraordinary they were, and the dynamics in our family, which I think people would find very interesting and relatable. And it was funny. And everybody in it's really funny. And my brother is a brilliant mind, and my sister was so incredibly talented and had such a huge heart. And my mother was an unbelievably strong, stoic, but also full of life sort of character, despite her illness of multiple sclerosis. Enough time had gone by where I could just sort of really sit back and take into account my family. And I wanted to see them again. And I've always had the subtitle. I did not knowing the title. I always knew the subtitle would be Friday Afternoon Club. I found writing it a form of visitation. The hard part was finishing it much more than actually writing it. It was all the highs and lows in our lives.
Griffin, you write about some incredibly difficult and painful moments from your past in the memoir, sort of starting with the murder of your sister by her former boyfriend. Was it cathartic to revisit that? Was it difficult? How did you find the process of writing about these experiences?
I didn't find it cathartic. I don't know that ever violence and heartache and missing and elements of anger ever really quite go away. And I think anyone who's experienced a tragic loss in their lives is repelled by the word closure. I found that aspect of the book, specifically the trial, I wanted to get it right. I wanted to just describe just the facts, ma'am, and leave my feelings out of it and not comment as little as possible, because the trajectory of that disastrous trial from the first day on, that just got worse and worse. I wanted it to just go day by day by day so that the reader will really experience what we experienced in that courtroom. And I'm very aware, my father wrote an incredible essay for Vanity Fair that was his first published work about that trial. So I was also very conscious that I was writing it as a sibling and not as a father. But I remained in awe that he could write about it as a father and get it so right. I was coming at it from my experience.
Griffin, stating the obvious here, but for people who don't know, your father was Dominic Dunne, your aunt and uncle John Gregory Dunne and Joan Didion. And I bring that up as a writer talking to another writer. You're in the enviable position, having been around some very talented writers, and you've gotten your own work. But I'm wondering, you talk about summoning them and sort of being with their spirits. I'm wondering, was there any, when you were working on this, any advice that rang in your head or wisdom you gleaned from your Aunt Joan Didion or your father, for instance, for this, that sort of led the way for you?
Yes. There was a period where both my father and my brother were having issues, as one does with any family member, but we were having issues with my father. We were both very angry about something. And it led to much more of a discussion about the past and that kind of thing where you bring up things from the past and you did this. It got a little blamey. And my dad just took it all in a way he could never have decades earlier. And he took it all in and he said, you know, boys, write it down. Say whatever you want about me. You'll learn from it. Just write it. If you want, I'll read it. Just put it down on paper. Just let me have it. Just go at me with guns a-blazing. I think you'll feel great. And I love that. Not that I went after my dad guns a-blazing in the book, but that always stayed in my mind. It freed me. And it made me know that if he were to read this in some other alternate life, I think he'd be very proud at how my honest portrayal of him and his growth from capturing his abusive childhood and his insecurities and his struggles with alcohol when we were much younger and his obsession with socializing to his rehabilitation, to his AA saved his life. And this growth, when I was writing it, I was just stunned by the growth of one person. That's something else I really wanted to get across in the book, was the growth of not only my father. I say in the epithet I used is from him. He said it to me once. He went, what can I say, kiddo? I'm a work in progress. And we all are. So I wanted to show that work in progress. And he went out guns a-blazing.
Griffin, you speak about alternate lives and layers of lives. And I just want to say, I'm so thrilled to talk to you because After Hours has always been one of my favorite films. And I still remember watching that in the theater and saying, I need to move to New York, along with my brother telling me that. You were a young man. It's a movie that lives in the minds and hearts of so many people. So I love learning some of the trivia about it, like the fact that you briefly considered a young Tim Burton as the director. Is that right?
We went to Marty first, but he was off doing Last Temptation of Christ. And not knowing it would be, they pulled the plug on the production. In that interim, we saw a short movie before a feature that neither Amy Robinson or I can remember. But we were really struck by a Tim Burton short. And then we went to see Tim. And then when Marty's movie fell apart, first thing he came back to was After Hours. And when Tim found out that Marty wanted to do it, he said, I graciously step away from this project. I don't want to do anything that would inhibit Mr. Scorsese's next movie. Something very elegantly phrased like that. But the question you asked was about why not more acting? I actually am. I've got a movie. I'll just plug it. I was just doing a junket for it right up until this, for a movie called Ex-Husbands that I'm in with James Norton. I'm the central main character. It was Rosanna Arquette. I'm back with Rosanna again, and an actor named Miles Heiser. We shot it in Tulum, and I play if Paul Hackett had reached the age of 69 and had learned nothing from his adventures, that would be who I play in this movie.
Griffin, your family has not only written so much about themselves, but they've also been chronicled so much in the press. Were there any misconceptions that you set out to correct when you were writing your memoir, or any matters you wanted to clarify, or anything along those lines?
There was a biography. It was supposed to be a biography. I don't want to bring too much attention to it, except to say there's a biography about my father and a biography about Joan that I had a lot of problems with for a number of different reasons, some factual, some point of view. That was hardly a motivation for me to want to write my book. It was upsetting the record straight. There's only the world that I knew from growing up in it. And so whatever had been written about them never crossed my mind in the course of what I was writing.
Griffin, one of the things I love, again, is you've moved through so many layers of your life. You even had a job backstage feeding popcorn to the camels at Radio City during the Christmas extravaganza. But what I really loved is, again, the layers. You had a roommate early on who was complaining to you that she had to go to London to film a really, quote, really stupid script. And then, so she left and then came back with almost a different personality or different image. Can you tell us about that roommate?
I can. It's a period in my life where I roomed with my best friend who moved to New York to be with me, who wanted to be an actress. Her name is Carrie Fisher, and we were both starting out. And that section in the book is about our friendship from the moment we met that takes us through the opening of the movie, which turned out to be this stupid movie. It was called Star Wars. That she would call me from London, waking me up in the middle of the night to complain about the bagels she had to wear on the side of her head and the huge monkey that was chasing him down hallways, running with them, and ray guns that didn't have triggers. And she went on and on about what a turkey this movie was. But she did not come back changed. What changed was the world around her. It was the first time I had ever experienced having a best friend become incredibly famous when I was still feeding camels popcorn. And when you're both in the same field and you see all that attention, and suddenly our apartment was filled with actors and rock stars I'd grown up idolizing, and here they were to see Carrie, not me, and it wasn't my time. It reminded me of being a child around all the movie stars and directors when I was a kid, when I was growing up. Like, I was just a kid in that. I was a kid wandering through a party on my way to go to bed. And I felt that way all over again. So we always remained close friends, but I couldn't ride the sidecar to her fame and identity. I had to sort of do my own. So I moved out and we picked up our friendship a little further down the road.
Well, Griffin, this is just one of many incredible stories in your new memoir. So to all of the listeners out there, I highly recommend you go out, add to cart, as we love to say, and enjoy it, because it's a delicious read, not just for the summer, but for all times. Griffin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Griffin.
All right. Thanks, guys.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene: Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Okay, Michael, we know it's the weekend. People have summer to attend to. Do you have anything at all you can recommend?
I do, and I guess coming off of maybe Griffin Dunne and 80s movies, this is a documentary about a different side of the 80s. It's called Bratz. You may have heard of it, Ashley. It's got some of our favorite movies featured in it by extension: Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and St. Elmo's Fire. And it's made by Andrew McCarthy, who is the star of many of those films. And it details his sort of going in search of his fellow stars of the Brat Pack: Emilio Estevez, Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, Rob Lowe, Demi Moore, and sort of trying to track them down 30-some, almost 40 years later, really, and how that article about them in New York Magazine did or did not affect them. It surely affected McCarthy. He seems to have struggled with almost how it cursed him most of his life and career. It's a great summer documentary. Sort of lets you go time travel back to the 80s, let you see all of a sudden these people. And who knew that Demi Moore was such a sort of like philosopher Yoda about what life is and how you need to adjust to it. Poignant at times, powerful, intriguing, and it just sort of lets you sort of in on some of the making of these films and what went on behind the scenes with this incredibly young cast. These people were in their 20s at the time, a time when Hollywood was switching over to the youth movement. So it's called Bratz, and it is streaming on Hulu right now. And you, my dear, how about you?
I'm sure you've probably already seen the entire season, but have you been watching Eric on Netflix?
No, my mother watched it and told me it's quite good. Tell me about it.
Well, it's really bizarre. It's set in 80s New York City, so of course we're going to love it. And it stars Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays a guy named Vincent Anderson, who's a puppeteer on a show that's kind of like The Muppets or Sesame Street. And his young son goes missing. And it is really, the series is a psychological drama about how this puppeteer is sort of clinging to his son's drawings of this puppet that he designed named Eric. And he's convinced that if he can get Eric on TV, then his son will come home. But the premise is a little bizarre, but I think the acting in this is what really makes this show quite incredible. So Cumberbatch is really at his finest. Also, there's a very strong performance from Gabby Hoffman, who plays his wife, the mother of the missing boy. It's heartfelt, heart-wrenching, and these are complicated characters, right? And nothing is very black and white in terms of their behavior and their motivations and what drives them. But it's a really interesting show. Also a time capsule to what it was like in the 1980s in New York City. Well, there's some conversation going on online about how this story is based on the missing person case of a boy named Eitan Patz, who was 6 years old in 1979 when he was walking to a school bus stop in Manhattan for the very first time and never returned. So it's a bit reminiscent of that. And so anyone who followed that case, which has had some interesting developments in the past few years, is going to think that this feels very familiar, though it's definitely worthy of your time. It's called Eric on Netflix. Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Absolutely. Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan, and our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julia Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting, but in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us. Ba-dum-bum.